From the University of Nebraska at Omaha, this is NCITE Insights.
Thank you for joining us today for another episode of NCITE Insights. My name is Sara, and I am one of our project managers here at NCITE. Today, we will be discussing the 2026 Gruyter Handbook of the Psychology of Terrorism. The handbook is comprised of 35 chapters by terrorism researchers across the globe that examine everything from the theories of radicalization to vulnerable contexts and understanding emotions in terrorists and the public's response to attacks. We're joined today by the handbook's editors, Dr. Clark McCauley, Dr. Sophia Moskalenko, and NCITE's director, Dr. Gina Ligon. Clark, Sophia, and Gina, welcome to the show. Could each of you tell us a little bit about yourselves? Let's start with Clark.
I'm a social psychologist who became a political psychologist. 40 years of teaching and researching in Bryn Mawr College.
Thank you. Sophia, can you go next?
Yeah, I am also a social psychologist, researching extremism, political violence, terrorism, disinformation, misinformation, and I'm currently at Latvia University in Latvia.
And Gina.
Hi, I'm Gina Ligon. I am an industrial and organizational psychologist, and I study leadership, organizational structures, and malevolent innovation.
Thank you so much. Now, to start things off, you three are colleagues and friends. You've known each other for 30 plus years. How did you all meet?
Guess I should start and say that I met Gina when she was teaching at Villanova University, a mile or two up the road from Bryn Mawr College. And I met Sophia when she was an undergraduate at Bryn Mawr College.
Yeah, I the only thing I will add to that, Sara, is, I've long admired both of their writing for years. And when I found out that I was going to have a professorship next door to him, I asked a mutual friend of ours, John Horgan, if he would introduce me to him. And he did. And so I basically told him I would do anything he needed me to do just so I could spend more time with him. I said, I will analyze data for you. I will edit manuscripts. I mean, I wanted to be like a super grad student because he is a pillar in the field. I was an assistant professor. I think I was, so professionally speaking, big as a house when we met. If you remember, Clark, I was pregnant with my second son, Henry, who's now 18. So that tells you how long ago it was. But that's when I met you. And he was very kind and gracious to an assistant professor at Villanova University.
That's wonderful. Did you all, in those early stages of your relationships, did you think that you would be collaborating this many years later or on something like this handbook?
I didn't.
No, he was so tough. Rick was so tough for me. He made me cry so badly one time. I got my first migraine.
My goodness.
So I really didn't think that I would still be doing this to myself 30 years later.
Very gracious of you not to mention that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had read, they had co-authored several books, the two of them, and obviously, really seminal journal articles in our field. And so I had read the two of them and their collaboration, and they had been so, just this indomitable pair of researchers in our field. I mean, McCauley and Moskalenko, Moskalenko and McCauley is frequently cited by everyone writing in this space. And so when they asked me to join them, I, on editing this handbook, I felt unworthy, to be honest. They're just really pyramids. I shouldn't say pyramid to you guys. They are leaders in the field, and but they convinced me that I could help with some of the organizational psychology chapters. And so that was my very small contribution to the team. But I was really grateful to get to see how they work and how they work together in their creative processes. And, just hope that I can find a collaborator that's as symbiotic as the two of them are in future parts of my career. They're amazing.
That's wonderful. And that actually segues beautifully to my next question for you of how did this come to be, this handbook? Has it been years in the making? What are the pieces that go in together to make this massive effort come to light?
It was pretty speedy, actually, but Sophia's the one to say.
Well, Clark and I have been over the years invited to contribute chapters individually and jointly to a number of handbooks. And we're very grateful to have had that opportunity. But every once in a while, we would talk about how, this is not the handbook that we would have put together. So it was just kind of a thread, between us. And then an offer came from the Gruyter to Clark, and he forwarded it to me. And I said, we have to. We've been talking about it for so long. We really should put together the handbook that is not out there that we always thought that should be. And I believe that that's exactly what we've done. We've designed this handbook to fill the space in the fundamental knowledge on terrorism that has not really been touched. There's some focuses of this handbook that we believe are really important, and we've done our best to advance them in the field. And we're proud to now have them represented by really formidable scholars and their work in the handbook.
That's great. Clark, can you start, and then Sophia, I'll ask you to join, discussing the two pyramids model of radicalization to terrorism and how how is the model useful when thinking about terrorism today?
Well, the two pyramids model is an improvement on the one pyramid model that was selling not too long after 9/11. And I realized that what was wrong with the one pyramid model was that it assumed that more radical ideas and more radical actions went together. And we had a lot of evidence that that's not right. That there are 100 people with extreme ideas for every one person that ever turns to extreme action. And it's basically that disjunction that led us to think we should think about radicalization of ideas and radicalization of action, behavior, as two different problems, two different psychologies, and then two different pyramids. Bottom of the pyramid is the less extreme, apex is the more extreme. For the opinion pyramid, the apex is feeling a personal moral responsibility to fight for the cause you care about. And at the top of the action pyramid is terrorism.
Are there specific case studies that walk us through the cycles?
Well, we included at the beginning of this handbook 8 case histories of terrorism. And I don't think that there's any other handbook that has ever started with that kind of material. But we did it so that there would be some examples of the ideas that we wanted to talk about in the handbook. And so some of those examples, some of those cases include a story, a trajectory at the individual level. a trajectory that shows the difference between extreme ideas and extreme action. So one of my favorites is a case of Kawaja, Canadian young man. He's particularly useful and interesting because he was big on the internet, and he was especially big writing almost daily at some periods to the woman he was hoping to marry in Pakistan. And that record of his emails is an extremely rare thing because you get to see his ideas day by day, month by month, over a long period of time. And a lot of people have recognized that retrospective accounts of radicalization, how I came to do something extreme, those retrospective accounts have a lot of flaws in them. We make up stories to fit our current situation. We adjust our history to explain where we are now. And so it's rare and very valuable to have this kind of a day-by-day record of somebody moving toward more extreme ideas, and then finally, after a long time of more extreme ideas, moving to more extreme action and going to Pakistan, trying to get to Afghanistan, trying to fight with the Taliban against the U.S. and its allies. So anyway, that one case is a particularly useful one because you get to see a long period of time, his ideas changing over time. And only after years of that do you begin to see change in behavior.
And one thing I've learned from Clark too is how what he touched on at the beginning, right, which is that sometimes the beliefs or the justification for the behavior comes after. And I think that's really confusing to a lot of law enforcement, particularly right after 9/11, when they thought these dangerous ideas led to dangerous action. And what we see with some of the case studies that were in there, Tim McVeigh is a great one, where, as he got more and more committed to the act of violence, he also became more ardent in his beliefs, which I think in some ways helped him then justify doing such heinous things. I mean, he was the bomber that blew up Oklahoma City's Murrow building, which, killed 19 children. He was able to kind of rationalize or explain or aggrandize his actions by the belief after. And by justifying, I mean, he was toying with some of the ideas. He had some formative events that we talked about with watching Waco and, government overreach. But if you really look at it, a lot of his behaviors and escalation in the action pyramid preceded his beliefs, and he never really had that coherent of a belief system. So that's one why we definitely want to talk about two pyramids as opposed to one leading to the other.
Can I jump in with my favorite case for a second? So also on the same idea of why it's important to separate opinions from action, my favorite story, which is one of the case studies, is that of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, who was also known as the Butcher of Baghdad. And the remarkable thing about him is that he was just always trouble. Since when he was a kid, he got arrested for multiple offenses, most of which were also offenses to the Muslim religion. He was arrested for public drunkenness. He was arrested for attempted rape. He was covered in tattoos, which earned him a green name. He was covered in tattoos, which earned him the nickname the Green Man, also a practice forbidden in Islam. So he was really not interested in the whole agenda of Islamic radicalization. He was interested in violence and power and climbing the social hierarchies of violent groups in his native Zarqa, where he joined street gangs, finally ended up in prison. And that was really the time of his life. He ended up running a whole wing of the prison. The prison officials couldn't enter without his permission into that wing. And it was so great for him that when he was released, he refused to leave for 3 days, the maximum security prison. So after he got out of prison, he thought, okay, what can be better than this? And he decided that the one thing that could be better than this is if he could join a major terrorist group like Al Qaeda. So he could run a whole huge, violent group rather than a small local one. And so he went to Osama bin Laden in the mountains of Afghanistan and pitched his case. And it was so obvious that this person was unhinged that Osama bin Laden and Zawahiri, his second in command, shipped him off to Iraq. They didn't want him near them. And then, as he reigned terror in Iraq, killing Muslims, they kept writing to him, trying to talk reason into him that he's actually doing damage to their cause by this violence against Muslims. That's not what Al Qaeda is about. And he really didn't care. He just wanted to be, this figure of fear and power. And until his very late stages of his career, he knew so little about ideology that he would bring this guy with him to any speaking engagements. The guy was very well versed in the Islamic, theory and he could cite from Quran. So the guy would come forward and talk Islam, and then Zarqawi could, after him, kind of menace and play with muscles and charisma. So that's also really interesting in terms of how we think about what makes somebody join a terrorist group, what makes somebody become a terrorist. Because in this case, his motivation was very strong. It was very early. It was very apparent. And it had very little to do with ideology. And yet it propelled him, this motivation, to the very top of the greatest terrorist organization in the world of that time and maybe to date.
Interesting that we ended with you bringing up that particular case study from the beginning of the handbook, because my next question is, does ideology matter for preventing terrorism today? Does the understanding of that ideology matter? And where does it have utility? Sophia, do you want, since you provided that case study, would you like to weigh in on
I
that?
think Clark is knee deep in this debate in his most recent writing. And so I think he should be really well positioned to do that. Would you?
Sure.
Well, I've been arguing for a long time that ideology is much too big a part of how we try to think about terrorism. We even have definitions of terrorism as ideologically motivated violence. Governments talk like that. Security people talk like that. Well, first of all, no social scientist would put the motivation for a behavior in the definition of the behavior to be explained. So if you start off by saying, well, terrorism is ideologically motivated violence, you've just blinded yourself to the whole range of other possible motivations that terrorists can have, which Sophia and I have been at some pains to try to describe. Lots of motivations. So it's a problem. It's a problem in definition. It's a problem because nobody really knows what ideology is. There's no consensus about the definition. Nobody has a decent measure of ideology. Everybody knows that ideology changes over time in response to events in the political world. Everybody knows that, but then how do we track those changes over time? We don't have a measure. unless you think an attitude measure like asking people where they are on a left-right scale counts as ideology, which seems like we don't need ideology anymore. All we need is attitude. So there's good reasons to think ideology is not helping us empirically to understand terrorism or terrorists. Now, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's completely useless, because Gina has a good line on that. Gina, tell them a little about how you think ideology can be important for understanding targeting, among other things.
Yeah, I think it's probably my bias, right, of being an organizational person. So I always think about organizational norms that provide parameters around what's an acceptable or unacceptable behavior. So if you think about, norms of how you dress for work or what time you show up, like that's what an organizational psychologist does. And so when you have a group who has organized around a core set of beliefs and principles, whether that's the driving motivation for all the members or not, it usually is not. But if that is, it does provide bounds for what's an acceptable target. And so for those of us who are looking at the more mature groups who have planning and tactics where they're going after certain targets, and also the tactics they use, it provides some bounds for what's acceptable or what's not. And I'll give you an example. A lot of the anti-government extremists, both in the US and in Europe, are very skeptical and dubious of big tech. They believe that is part of, the institutions of which they are wanting to rise up against and are controlling them and overreach of individual rights. And so as a consequence, they won't use a lot of the platforms that are provided by big tech for, even if it's encrypted messaging and has all the affordances that they would want from an op security. But because their ideology is distrustful of any big tech organization, they have prescriptions around norms of how they can communicate with each other. And so that's like one example of how ideology, I think, can help us understand where we can find them, what types of targets they're going to find acceptable. We talked a lot about the sporting events that just happened at the World Cup, and which group, not all groups found all of the potential targets that were happening across the US and Mexico and Canada acceptable targets, but some of them did. And so understanding the ideology of who's in group and who's out group, as defined by their kind of belief system and principles, can help us at least understand what's an acceptable target or not. It doesn't mean that rogue members aren't going to get out of line and go above and it's not like that dogmatic, like 100% of the time they're not going to do that. But at least gives us some hint around what targets we should be hardening and protecting when a certain group is escalating action or has an opportunity to do so. The other reason I think I just want to echo, and you can cut this if you guys want, but about ideology not being as central. So y'all know that NCITE is funded by Department of Homeland Security. And one of the things that we have to be very careful when we are researching terrorism in the United States is protecting civil rights and civil liberties associated with the First Amendment. So that is something unique to the United States. And so if you are only looking at beliefs and ideas, you are actually, no matter what they are, most of them are constitutionally protected here in the US. And so we just have a really different framework for how we can study them when we are, especially if we're using government money to do so. And funding, wonderful members in our consortium. We just funded a great project on anti-tech extremism. And, we're very careful about making sure that they were looking at the behavior and the violence as opposed to the ideas, because a lot of the ideas about being anti-technology or anti-data center are First Amendment protected in the United States. And so it's really important to focus on the criminal behavior, the violence, the violent adjacent activity. And so that's why I have always loved Clark and Sophia's two pyramid model, because I do think if you're American law enforcement, you should really be focusing on the pyramid about escalation of activity toward that top peak on terrorism. And that's unique to the US, but something that I feel strongly about as a Nebraskan and a US researcher.
Another part of that problem is there's a whole lot of people at this moment who are anti data centers.
Yeah.
So if you frame your problem such that they are the problem and their ideas are the problem and they are the enemy, and that's the problem we're going to try to attack, and we're going to try to counter these ideas, and now we're battling ideas instead of actions, you have just expanded the nature of the problem and the targets that you need to work on by factors of hundreds.
Yep.
And who can afford it?
Good point.
Very good point. In the handbook, we talk about, you talk about psychological aspects such as power of music, terrorist leadership, and organization. Where's the through line from understanding these psychological aspects to understanding terrorism?
I love how y'all talk about the psychology of music. So I hope one of you will talk about that chapter. When I got to read it after you'd edited it, I was like, this is amazing. So I don't know which one of you wants to talk about the psychology of music chapter, but it was great.
I think
It is
this is
perhaps
the
the
chance
most unusual.
I think this is the chance to talk about the emotions in general, because that's what music is about. So I think, Clark, maybe you can.
Oh, well, you might say the parallel to my doubts about the importance of ideology in understanding terrorism. Parallel to that is my effort to pay more attention to emotions. When you read case histories up close of people who have radicalized either to activism, that's legal, political action, or terrorism, illegal, violent, political action. For either activism or terrorism, when you read accounts about how people are moved to action, you're up to your elbows in emotions. They are up to their elbows in emotions. And emotions prepare us for action in ways that don't run necessarily or usually even through our rational choice thinking. So if you want to try to understand terrorism as a rational choice problem, which a lot of people do, especially a lot of people in political science, but maybe not so many people in psychology. But if you want to do that, you're going to miss in this means end calculation of rational choice. You're going to miss something really important about what happens to people as they react to political events and to other people's reactions to those events. And it's anger. It's shame at not doing something about what you're angry about. It's humiliation. It's fear. Fear for people you care about. Sadness for the suffering of people that you care about. So we have a whole section on the emotions that are important for understanding terrorism. And this chapter about music is one of those chapters. But it is, as I think Sophia was suggesting, it is perhaps the most unusual. I feel confident in saying there isn't any other handbook about terrorism that has a chapter about the power of music. And as Sophia put it, what is that power? It's emotion. That's what music does, is it stirs emotion in us. And, whether it's Islamist activism and terrorism, and their videos are full of nasheeds, these male-only, no music, no instruments, voices, very stirring. You have to listen to a couple to appreciate how powerful it is. And the right-wing people in their meetings and their recruitment, they're heavy on music too. Kind of heavy metal style stuff. So when you look around and you pay a little attention to how people actually behave in relation to others, recruiting others, and moving others and themselves in the direction of action, you see a lot of emotion and you see a lot of music. And this chapter is, I believe, the first serious effort to put the power of music in front of the research community in terrorism studies.
And I want to add to that that it is a huge, I think, benefit of all three of us being psychologists, that this handbook is focused so heavily on the wealth of knowledge that psychology brings to the problem of terrorism, that we believe it is really instrumental, like, to understanding what motivates terrorists to do it. It's very easy to be kind of led astray by the stories that terrorists tell. But as psychologists, we know that people don't often understand their own motivation. And then they have incentives to misrepresent to themselves and to others. And so understanding emotions, is something that we as psychologists know is really important to really dig in deep in trying to figure out what brought people somewhere. And we also have a chapter that I think is unique, that by Neil Shortland, that talks about emotions in people who work in this field, in people who have to watch video after video of terrorist propaganda, beheadings, torture, all this really traumatizing material, who themselves are human and they have emotions and they are colored by their experiences, even as they're supposed to be professionals, dispassionate, fully rational. So the separation of emotions from the field of terrorism is a problem on both sides. On the side of terrorism, it makes us less able to understand what drives them and to prevent or counter it. And on the side of practitioners, it makes us vulnerable to personal trauma, but also perhaps to decisions and focuses that are not necessarily the most clear-minded. So recognizing the power of emotion is important in both of these, and I think our handbook is unique in emphasizing that.
You might wonder where does all this perspective show up in the different chapters, which are, after all, written by many different people, and they don't all talk like me and Sophia and Gina. But I think the perspective comes across a lot in the introduction to each section. Each section has got an introduction that kind of sets the stage and frames that section. And I think a lot of what we're talking about now, about the perspective that psychologists bring to this area, I think a lot of that is embodied in the introductions.
Yeah, that was a really unique activity that I got to do that Sophia and Clark had asked me, which was to do an introduction, but also kind of explain why we chose that topic and that set of authors. And it allowed, some of our authors are not psychologists, right? But they are writing about constructs that we believe are important to the psychology of extremism and understanding it. And so it allowed us to kind of connect those dots for the readers in ways that maybe sometimes the authors hadn't set out to do, but we very much had a very specific reason for choosing them and choosing that topic.
That segues perfectly to my next question of what do the three of you think is the significance or utility of this handbook for the wider academic and practitioner communities?
The big picture of it is terrorism is an example of intergroup conflict. You could say it's the warfare of the weak. You could say, as most social psychologists would say, that you can't understand intergroup conflict by studying only one side, any more than you could understand a boxing match by having a focus only on one of the boxers in the ring. The understanding has to be an understanding of the relationship over time, of the interaction back and forth, the trajectory of action and reaction over time. That interaction is what you have to understand in order to understand terrorism as a form of intergroup conflict. And the world is, in my opinion, unfortunately, full of people who want to locate the problem out there. It's the terrorism. It's these bad ideas in their heads. And that's why we got to fight those ideas. I think this is just inadequate for the reasons I was just saying. So I would say the biggest picture contribution of this volume to scholars and practitioners alike is the framing of the problem as an intergroup conflict problem, and not a problem of how these weird people got these weird ideas in their heads. And the implication of that is we got to be studying the targets of terrorism just as well as we study the terrorists. And we know we'll be making progress on that when we have as many databases of citizens and mass audiences' reactions to terrorism as we do have databases of terrorist activities and groups. But we're nowhere near to that.
Thank you so much for your time today. Like I said, we could spend several more hours going in depth of this handbook. I got a preview of it and skimmed through it, and I was fascinated as somebody who is adjacent to your fields. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you would like to cover at this time?
Our thanks to the many authors who contributed. You know, you can't have dozens of chapters without a lot of cooperation from a lot of good people. So, you know, we, the editors, I think should recognize our gratitude to the authors who took time, made an investment, put up with our editing, got a final chapter in. We owe those people.
Hear, hear.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of NCITE Insights. The National Counterterrorism Innovation, Technology, and Education Center, or NCITE, is an academic center of excellence for the Department of Homeland Security. Looking to find out more? Check out our website at incite.unomaha.edu or email us at incite@unomaha.edu.